The price of panda diplomacy. For a zoo in Finland, it's too high to keep the animals. But this reportedly has nothing to do with politics. For decades, China's been loaning giant pandas to other countries. This has strengthened the nation's international relationships and given China good publicity. In 2018, it sent 2 of the animals to a Finnish zoo following a visit to the country by China's president. But pandas aren't cheap to take care of. The zoo in Finland says it spent nearly $9 million on their enclosure and an additional $1.6 million per year for the animals' care and the lease paid to China. But a drop-off in visitors due to the COVID pandemic, combined with the global inflation that followed it, made the pandas too expensive for the zoo to keep. So even though it was supposed to have them for at least another 8 years, it's planning to send them back to China in the weeks ahead. A Finnish government official says the decision has nothing to do with China-Finland relations, but it means Finns who are fans of the pandas will have to travel abroad to see them. Hi, I'm Carl Azuz for The World from A to Z. If you're watching this show from Florida, we know there's a chance you're watching from home. Several counties across the state canceled in-person classes for Thursday with Hurricane Helen spinning and gaining strength in the Gulf of Mexico. The storm's expected to make landfall somewhere in Florida sometime Thursday night. When we put this show together, forecasters expected it would come ashore near the Panhandle or maybe the state's Big Bend area where it curves around the northeastern part of the Gulf. They also think Helen will be a Category 3 hurricane at that time, capable of stripping away parts of roofs, snapping trees, and knocking out electricity and water. Helen had already whipped by Cancun, Mexico as a tropical storm, but was expected to get much stronger. We'll update you on the hurricane in tomorrow's show.
Word and knowledge. What 2 U.S. politicians took part in the first televised presidential debate? Franklin D. Roosevelt and Herbert Hoover, John F. Kennedy and Richard M. Nixon, Harry Truman and Thomas Dewey, Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan. The year was 1960. The studio was in Chicago, Illinois, and the candidates were John F. Kennedy and Richard M. Nixon.
On this date in world history. It was on September 26, 1960 that the first televised presidential debate took place, and how the candidates looked made a big difference. Then Senator Kennedy appeared tan and rested. Then Vice President Nixon was sick and sweaty. And most Americans who watched the debate reportedly thought Kennedy won, while most who listened on the radio reportedly thought Nixon won. Exactly 1 year before that, in 1959, a storm hit Japan that was more intense and deadly than any ever recorded in the Asian country. It was a super typhoon named Vera. It had rapidly intensified before making landfall, and when it did, the storm had wind speeds of more than 160 miles per hour, the equivalent of a Category 5 hurricane. Several thousand people lost their lives, and damage estimates were in the hundreds of millions. And this was the date in 1580 when English navigator Francis Drake sailed into Plymouth, England. He'd just completed a circumnavigation of the globe, becoming the first British mariner to accomplish that feat.
The journey to health isn't always easy. Even if you're eating the right things, you may still struggle with weight, consuming something you may not even realize, which is why it's critical to pay close attention to food labels, says Dr. Sanjay Gupta.
First things first. Check the number of servings in the package. This is really important. Sometimes you think the calorie count is for the whole package, but in fact, it just represents 1 serving. A lot of people get tripped up by this.
Gupta says the number of calories and nutrients needed daily are different for everyone and varies based on things like age, size, and overall health.
Now, look at the daily value of nutrients, the DV. It's based on an average 2,000 calorie diet, and it can help serve as a guideline for how many nutrients you should be getting. A good trick to help you gauge whether the food contains enough of a nutrient is to use the 5-20 rule. If the DV percent is 5% or less, that means it's relatively low in the nutrient, obviously. 20% or more, fairly high.
Also, make sure to look at the ingredient list. Gupta says the first few listed make up the bulk of the food, so make sure there's not too much fat, sugar, or salt.
Finally, watch out for words you can't pronounce. If you can't pronounce it, you probably shouldn't eat it.
I'm Mandy Gaither.
Country roads. I'm kidding, I'm not that great a singer even without a cold. But I am headed to West Virginia today to recognize Mrs. Brown's class. Van Junior Senior High School is in the community of Van in the mountain state of West Virginia. Mr. Hoffman's class is next. The Wildcats are watching from Sweet Home, Alabama. Tarrant High School is in the city of Tarrant. And finally to Columbus, Nebraska. Lakeview Junior Senior High School is there. Big hello to the Vikings of Mr. Rudloff's class in the Cornhusker State. I often mention state nicknames in that segment. I do that just because I like it. The history behind the nicknames, I think it's good trivia. But what about the state names themselves? Where did the 50 of those come from?
Which Americans are the sleepy ones? Or the South Wind people? Or the people of the mountains? The names of some of our states have pretty strange origins. But before I give you the answers to those, let's look at a few common themes in state naming. Several states are named after specific people. Georgia, in honor of King George, Louisiana, in honor of King Louis XIV, Lord de la Warr, the Duke of York, Queen Henrietta Maria, and William Penn, specifically the woods of William Penn, the Virgin Queen of England, and West Virginia just means west of the land of the Virgin Queen. King Charles II also gets 2 states, North and South Carolina. And you're probably able to guess who the state of Washington is named after. A handful of states are named for people groups, like Indiana, land of the Indians. The Illini were warriors. Oklahoma is said to be home to the Red people, not to be confused with Colorado, which means colored red. North and South Dakota get their name from the Indian word for allies. Many state names describe the land they call home. Snowy land, mountainous land, mainland, land of wild sage oreganum, land of tomorrow, Red Island, Great Lands, and homeland. While several are named for bodies of water. We have the states of Flatwater, Muddy Water, Sky-Tinted Water, and Great Water. And their river counterparts, the Long Tidal River, the Beautiful River, Bend in the River, and the Wild Rushing Channel. Mississippi means the father of waters because of the vastness of the river by the same name. Arizona is the place of the small spring. And the rest don't really fall into specific categories. Vegetable gatherers or weed gatherers live in Alabama. And we have the Green Mountains, the Gem of the Mountains, Great Hill Small Place, the Great Plain, the Flowery One. New Jersey is named in honor of the Isle of Jersey. New Hampshire honors the county of Hampshire, England. California is named after an imaginary island in an old Spanish romance, and New Mexico is named for the Aztec war god Mexitli. Texas comes from the Indian word for friends. And now, the answers from the few we mentioned at the beginning. The sleepy ones live in Iowa. The South Wind people are in Kansas and Arkansas. And the people of the mountains live in Utah. This map also shows the meaning of each state's capitals, if you want to learn about those too.
Chilean athlete Sebastian Alvarez says this was a world first, and that it helps he came from a surfing family and also loves to skydive. He pulled off this stunt late last year, but because a surfing competition is coming up this weekend in the United Arab Emirates, Red Bull just released this video of Alvarez catching air from 12,000 feet and then catching an artificial wave near a Middle Eastern island. Coming down where surf's up, he's made waves on a wave that washes toward shore with a board that just soared with leash and ripcord through the sea and the sky, a dive above divers, a skim below flyers, a dream on a wake where you swim and you fly. I'm Carl Azuz, and that lands another edition of The World from A to Z. I'd love to see you again on Friday. You mean the world to me.